I didn't want to believe what I was seeing when the first reports started coming in. You always think you'll recognize the end of the world when it arrives. A nuclear flash, a meteor streaking through the sky, maybe even 4 men on horseback. But it wasn't any of that. It was just whispers at first, strange incidents in cities I'd never heard of. People acting erratically. Attacks. Then, before anyone could process what was happening, the world tipped sideways. I was at my uncle's old cabin when the radio cut out. That place had always been my sanctuary, a creaky little getaway buried deep in the woods. No cell service. No internet. Just me and my dog, Jasper. I'd only come out for a weekend, but by the time I realized something was wrong, the world outside had fallen apart. The first time I saw one of them was 2 days after the power went out. I was walking Jasper along the gravel path that winds through the woods when he froze, ears perked and growling low in his throat. I followed his gaze and saw a man stumbling through the trees. His skin was ashen, and his clothes hung in tatters. "Hey!" I called, keeping Jasper close. "Are you okay?" The man didn't answer. His head jerked toward me, and even at a distance, I could see his eyes, cloudy, empty, like a doll's. He took a step forward, and that's when I noticed the blood staining his shirt, seeping from a jagged tear in his side. He was limping, but not like someone in pain. More like someone whose body didn't quite work the way it used to. Jasper barked and lunged, but I yanked him back. "Stay," I whispered, backing away myself. The man made a sound, a guttural, inhuman groan, and started moving faster, almost lurching, toward us. I didn't think. I just ran, pulling Jasper behind me as we bolted for the cabin. By the time we reached the porch, the man was gone. But that didn't stop me from locking the door and shoving a chair under the handle for good measure. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing sounds, branches snapping, the faint shuffle of feet outside. Jasper growled more than once, his nose pressed to the crack at the bottom of the door. But morning came, and with it, an eerie silence. I decided to hike back to the main road, hoping to flag down a car or find some clue about what was happening. I left Jasper behind. I couldn't bear the thought of him getting hurt, but I didn't make it far. Just a mile down the trail, I found them. 3 of them this time, staggering through the trees. A woman, her jaw hanging slack like it was dislocated. A teenager, his face half missing, with jagged bite marks trailing down his arm. And a man in a suit dragging what looked like a briefcase by the handle, its contents spilling out behind him. They didn't notice me right away. I crouched behind a tree, holding my breath as I watched them shuffle by. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, but purposeful. And their faces, what was left of them, were contorted into something like hunger. I crept back to the cabin, my hands trembling the whole way. Jasper greeted me at the door, tail wagging like nothing was wrong, and I envied him. He didn't know the world had changed. He didn't know we were alone. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and whispered arguments with myself. I rationed my food, patched the holes in the cabin's walls, and tried to keep Jasper quiet when he barked at shadows outside the window. But every night they came closer. I could hear them now, shuffling through the woods, their groans like low thunder rolling through the trees. Last night was the worst. I was dozing in the armchair, the rifle I'd found in the attic resting across my lap, when Jasper started barking wildly. I jolted awake, heart hammering, and saw him standing at the front window, his fur bristling. Then I heard it, a thud against the door. Not a knock, something heavier. More deliberate. Thud. Thud. I grabbed the rifle and aimed it at the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the barrel steady. Jasper growled, his body tense as a spring, but he didn't move. And then the door creaked. Slowly, almost lazily, it began to swing inward. I don't know how they got in. I thought I'd barricaded it well enough, but the door gave way, and they were there, 3 of them, their eyes blank and their mouths gaping. I fired. The blast was deafening in the tiny cabin, and the first one dropped, its head snapping back as the bullet tore through it. But the others didn't even flinch. They just kept coming, their moans rising into a chilling, discordant chorus. I don't remember much after that. Just the sound of gunfire, Jasper barking and snarling, and the wet, sickening crunch of teeth on flesh. When I came to, the cabin was quiet again. Jasper was gone. The door hung open, swinging gently in the breeze. Now it's just me. The rifle is empty, and the food is running out. I don't know how long I can hold out here, but I know one thing, those things are still out there. And they're hungry. It's been 3 days since Jasper disappeared, and the silence in the cabin feels heavier with each passing hour. I keep waiting for the sound of his paws on the porch, for a bark, even a whimper, but there's nothing. Just the wind in the trees and the faint rustle of leaves. I haven't seen them since that night, but I know they're close. Sometimes, I hear the crunch of leaves outside, or the soft scrape of something brushing against the walls. Last night, I woke to the sound of breathing, low and raspy, just outside the window. I didn't dare move, didn't even reach for the rifle. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, until the sound faded. This morning, I ventured out to the edge of the clearing. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd see Jasper. But all I found were tracks in the dirt. Human footprints, but wrong. The toes were too long, the gait uneven, like whoever made them had forgotten how to walk properly. There was something else, too. A smell. Rotting meat, thick and cloying, hanging in the air like a warning. It was strongest near the tracks, but it seemed to linger everywhere, clinging to the trees and the grass and even my skin. I don't think they're just wandering aimlessly anymore. They're hunting. I've started barricading the cabin more thoroughly. I nailed the windows shut and dragged the old dresser in front of the door. The rifle's no use without ammunition, so I've been improvising, sharpening sticks, tying kitchen knives to broom handles. I found a hatchet in the tool shed, its blade rusted but sharp enough to split wood. It'll have to do. But deep down, I know it's not enough. I can't stay here forever. The food is nearly gone, and the well water is starting to taste off. I've been rationing what I have left, but I can feel my strength fading. My hands shake when I hold the hatchet, and my legs feel like lead when I walk. I've been thinking about the road. It's a mile to the main highway, maybe 2. If I can make it there, I might find a car, or another survivor. Someone who can tell me what's going on, who can help me. But the thought of leaving the cabin, leaving the only shelter I have, fills me with dread. This place isn't safe, but out there? Out there, it's worse. Tonight I'll decide. Stay, and wait for the inevitable, or run, and take my chances in the unknown. Either way, I don't think I'll survive this. If anyone finds this, know that I tried. I fought. I didn't let them take me without a fight. And if you see a golden retriever, a sweet boy with floppy ears and a wagging tail, please take care of him. His name is Jasper, and he's braver than I'll ever be. I didn't sleep that night. The cabin felt like a tomb, every creak of the old wood a reminder that I wasn't alone. Something was out there. I could feel it, lurking just beyond the flickering light of the lantern. I gripped the hatchet until my fingers went numb, my ears straining for the sound of footsteps, a groan, or worse, Jasper's bark. But the night passed without an attack. When dawn came, pale and gray, I made my decision. I couldn't stay here. Whatever was waiting for me out in the world couldn't be worse than the slow death of starvation, or the horror of waiting to be dragged from this cabin. I packed what little I had, a canteen, the last of the canned food, and the rusted hatchet. I found an old hunting knife in the tool shed and strapped it to my belt. Before I left, I scrawled a message on the cabin wall with a piece of charcoal. If you find this, the world is not what it was. Be careful. They're everywhere. I stepped out into the clearing, the morning air heavy with that same rotten stench. The forest felt different, too still, like even the birds knew to stay silent. The highway wasn't far. I just had to make it there. The first hour passed uneventfully. I stuck to the overgrown trails, the trees pressing in close on all sides. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made my heart race, but the woods seemed empty. Then I heard it, a faint sound, like something dragging through the underbrush. I froze, gripping the hatchet, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The sound grew louder, closer, until a figure emerged from the trees. It was a man, or what was left of one. His clothes were in tatters, his skin pale and mottled with decay. His head lolled to one side, his neck bent at an impossible angle. His jaw hung slack, and his eyes, milky white and unseeing, locked onto me. I took a step back, and the thing let out a low, guttural moan. It shambled toward me, its movements jerky and uneven but unrelenting. I didn't think. I swung the hatchet as hard as I could. The blade bit into its skull with a sickening crunch, and the thing collapsed at my feet, its body twitching before going still. I stood there, panting, staring down at the body. It didn't feel real. None of this did. But there wasn't time to process. The moan had been loud, too loud. And then I heard it, more groans, echoing through the forest. Not one, not two, but dozens. Panic set in, and I ran. I don't know how long I ran, dodging through the trees, the groans growing louder and closer. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I burst out onto the highway, the sight of the empty road was almost enough to make me collapse in relief. But I didn't have time to rest. The groans were still behind me, a wave of sound that promised only death. Then I saw it, a car, sitting abandoned on the side of the road. Its doors were open, and the hood was dented, but it looked intact. I sprinted toward it, praying it wasn't just a mirage. The keys were still in the ignition. I jumped in, slammed the door, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, and for a moment, I thought I might actually survive this. But as I looked up, I saw them, staggering onto the road from the trees, a wall of the dead, their faces twisted in hunger. I slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, the engine straining as I barreled toward the horde. The first few bodies crumpled under the wheels, but more kept coming, clawing at the windows, their hands smearing the glass with blood and filth. I screamed, more in terror than anger, and kept driving. The road ahead was clear, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Where could I go? Where could anyone go in a world like this? The car careened down the highway, the thuds of bodies against the undercarriage fading into the distance. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white, the scent of burning rubber and gasoline sharp in the air. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the cabin, away from them. The road stretched ahead, empty and eerie in the early morning light. Cars littered the shoulders, some flipped or smashed, others with doors hanging open as if their occupants had fled in haste. There were no signs of life, but there were signs of death everywhere. Dried blood on the pavement, shattered glass glittering like cruel diamonds. The silence should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It was heavy, suffocating, like the world was holding its breath. After a few miles, I spotted a gas station up ahead, its faded signs swinging in the breeze. The pumps were dark, the windows shattered, but I needed to stop. The fuel gauge was dipping dangerously close to empty, and my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. I pulled into the lot, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. Jasper's empty seat beside me felt like a gaping wound. He should have been here, his tail wagging, his head out the window, his warm, steady presence reminding me I wasn't alone. "Focus," I whispered to myself, and stepped out of the car, the hatchet gripped tightly in one hand. The gas station was a wreck. The glass doors hung crooked on their hinges, and the shelves inside were toppled, their contents scattered across the floor. The place reeked of spoiled food and decay. I moved cautiously, every nerve on edge, scanning the shadows for movement. Behind the counter, I found a corpse, human this time. A woman, her skin gray and sunken, her eyes wide and staring. She didn't move, and a quick glance confirmed she wouldn't. The gaping wound in her chest and the blood pooled beneath her told me she'd been gone a while. I turned away quickly, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat. Focus. Fuel. Food. Water. In the back of the station, I found a small storeroom that hadn't been completely looted. A case of bottled water sat on the floor, and a few cans of beans and soup were stacked on a dusty shelf. I stuffed what I could into a backpack I'd found behind the counter. Then I heard it, a faint shuffle, the sound of something dragging across the tiled floor. My heart stopped. I spun around, hatchet raised, and saw the corpse behind the counter sitting up. Its head turned slowly, its lifeless eyes locking onto mine, and then it opened its mouth. A low, guttural moan filled the room. I didn't wait. I ran, bursting out of the storeroom and through the gas station's shattered doors. The moan echoed after me, rising in volume, joined by others. They were close. Too close. I threw the backpack into the car and started the engine, slamming my foot on the gas. The car roared forward, and in the rearview mirror, I saw them, emerging from the woods, the gas station, the shadows. A wave of the dead, shambling, moaning, relentless. My hands trembled on the wheel as I pushed the car faster, the needle creeping past 70, then 80. The road blurred beneath me, and the groans faded into the distance. For now. But as the highway stretched ahead, the fear I'd been suppressing bubbled to the surface. There was no escaping them. Not really. They were everywhere, an endless tide that wouldn't stop until there was nothing left. The gas gauge dipped closer to empty, and my stomach twisted. I'd have to stop again soon. I'd have to fight. And eventually I'd lose. But not today. Not yet. The highway stretched into the horizon, but I knew it couldn't last forever. The gas gauge had already dipped into the red zone, and I hadn't seen another station for miles. The emptiness of the road gnawed at me, more unsettling than the horde I'd left behind. At least I knew what to expect from them. Ahead, the trees began to thin, giving way to open farmland. The landscape felt too exposed, like a wide-open throat ready to be slashed. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see figures shambling in the distance, but the road behind me was as barren as the fields. Finally, the car sputtered. The engine coughed once, twice, and then died. I coasted to the shoulder, the silence ringing in my ears. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, my mind racing. Walking felt like suicide, but staying here was worse. I glanced at the backpack on the passenger seat and then at the hatchet on the floor. At least I was armed. Kind of. All right, I muttered, slinging the bag over my shoulder and stepping out of the car. The wind was cold, carrying the faint, ever-present stench of decay. I tightened my grip on the hatchet and started walking. I kept to the road at first, but every crunch of gravel under my boots felt deafening. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, its unseen eyes boring into the back of my skull. So I veered into the fields, staying low as I moved parallel to the road. An hour passed. Maybe two. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, painting the fields in shades of orange and gold. It would have been beautiful if it weren't for the gnawing dread in my chest. Then I saw it, a farmhouse in the distance, its silhouette dark against the fading light. I hesitated. A part of me screamed to keep moving, to stay out in the open where I could see what was coming. But the thought of spending the night in the middle of a field, exposed and vulnerable, was worse. As I approached the house, I noticed how still it was. No movement in the windows, no lights, no sounds. The front door hung ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. No answer. I stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking under my weight. My grip on the hatchet tightened as I nudged the door open with my foot. The inside was dim, the fading sunlight filtering through dusty windows. The air was thick, carrying the faint scent of rot. "Anyone here?" I tried again, stepping inside. The living room was empty, the furniture overturned and scattered. A dark stain spread across the carpet, but there were no bodies. No signs of life, or unlife. Just silence. I cleared the first floor quickly, my nerves fraying with each creak of the old house. The kitchen was untouched, its cupboards still full. I grabbed what I could, cans of food, a couple of bottles of water, and shoved them into my bag. The stairs loomed ahead, leading to the second floor. I didn't want to go up there. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run, but I needed to know. If someone, or something, was here, I couldn't risk them following me. I crept up the stairs, wincing at every groan of the wood. At the top, a hallway stretched out before me, lined with closed doors. The first room was empty. So was the second. But the third. The smell hit me first. Sweet and sickly, like fruit left to rot in the sun. I pushed the door open slowly, my breath catching in my throat. A man sat slumped against the far wall, his head tilted back, his face slack and pale. Blood pooled around him, sticky and black, and a shotgun lay across his lap. His chest didn't rise or fall. He was long gone. But it wasn't just him. Something moved in the shadows behind him, a shape hunched and wrong. My heart seized as it stepped into the light, its milky eyes locking onto mine. It wasn't alone. The moment our eyes met, the creature let out a guttural, wet groan that made my stomach twist. Its jaw hung unnaturally low, exposing blackened gums and shattered teeth. Behind it, another figure emerged from the shadows, then another. 3 of them, maybe more, their bodies gaunt and twisted, skin hanging in loose, decayed folds. I took a step back, my boots scuffing the wooden floor. The sound was deafening in the tense silence, and their heads jerked toward me in unison. Then they moved, slow, shuffling steps at first, but with each moment, their movements grew faster, more deliberate. I didn't think. My body reacted before my brain could catch up. I turned and bolted down the hall, my feet barely touching the ground as I sprinted for the stairs. Behind me, the groans rose into a cacophony of hunger, accompanied by the thuds of bodies slamming against the walls as they scrambled to follow. The stairs groaned under my weight, but I didn't slow down. I hit the first floor and skidded into the living room, grabbing the edge of the overturned couch to steady myself. I needed to get out, but the front door felt miles away, and the sound of their pursuit was too close. In the corner of my eye, I spotted the shotgun the dead man had been holding. I cursed myself for not grabbing it. Even if it was empty, it could have been a weapon. All I had was the hatchet, and sheer, unfiltered terror. The first creature reached the bottom of the stairs as I reached the front door. I yanked it open, nearly tearing it off its hinges, and stumbled out onto the porch. My boots caught on the uneven wood, and I fell hard, the breath knocked out of me. I rolled onto my back, just in time to see the first one emerge from the doorway, its milky eyes locked onto me, its jaw widening in a grotesque parody of a grin. "No!" I gasped, scrambling backward, my hands clawing at the dirt. "No, no, no!" It lunged, its bony fingers outstretched, and I swung the hatchet wildly. The blade caught it in the neck, lodging deep in the soft flesh. It staggered but didn't stop. I yanked the hatchet free with a wet, sickening sound and swung again, this time cleaving its skull. It dropped like a marionette with its strings cut. The others were on me in seconds. I swung blindly, the hatchet carving arcs through the air, the blade connecting with bone and flesh. One grabbed my arm, its grip like iron, and I twisted free, slamming the hatchet into its temple. It crumpled, dragging me down with it. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to breathe. I was up and running, bolting toward the tree line, the moans and snarls chasing me like a living nightmare. The woods swallowed me whole, their shadows wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. Branches clawed at my face and arms as I stumbled through the underbrush, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. Finally, when my body could go no further, I collapsed against a tree, the bark rough against my back. The moans had faded, replaced by the deafening roar of blood in my ears. I sat there, gasping, clutching the hatchet in my trembling hands. The woods were silent again, save for the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was the kind that pressed down on you, heavy and oppressive, like the world itself was holding its breath. I don't know how long I sat there, staring into the darkness, waiting for something, anything, to move. Hours, maybe? But nothing came. I'm alive. For now. But I know it's only a matter of time. They're out there. They'll always be out there, waiting, searching. And eventually, they'll find me. Maybe it'll be tomorrow. Maybe next week. Or maybe I'll collapse first, starvation, exhaustion, hopelessness. It doesn't matter. All I can do is keep moving. Keep fighting. Keep surviving. Until I can't.